Ladies and gentlemen, today a review of Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Before I begin, I'm going to read a synopsis from IMDb. A charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers embark on an epic quest to retrieve a lost relic. But things go dangerously awry when they run afoul of the wrong people. I had a really good time with this movie. Now, I'm not a person who has played Dungeons & Dragons at all, but I do understand some of the lore, and I think that the world building in this movie is actually pretty good. There are some really incredible sequences here that are really helped by some really good CGI. Paramount put their best foot forward with this movie, and it's because they definitely know what they have. This is a very charming film. I have to give big props to Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez. Michelle Rodriguez is a huge standout in this movie. I think genuinely, this is some of the best acting and one of the best roles I've ever seen Michelle Rodriguez play and be in. She genuinely adds so much to this movie that I was just pleasantly surprised by it. She's really good in this movie. Chris Pine is always great. He's always very charming and adds a lot of depth to this character that I think really does help the plot here. There's a lot about this plot that could have gone awry. My mind harkens back to medieval time movies like even the original Dungeons & Dragons movie from the early 2000s. But what this movie does is it does its best to ground the story in a very simple premise that kind of turns the saving the princess from the castle motif into something a little bit more poignant. And that is definitely helped by Chris Pine's performance for sure. And everyone in this ensemble cast, and it really is an ensemble cast, really does have their day in the sun. I really love it when a movie like this with a big ensemble cast gives the story time to give each one of those characters their moment. And this movie does that in droves. It gives each character a story arc, it gives each character a really cool action sequence that kind of only can happen with their powers or with their know-how. I really like Justice Smith. I think that a lot of times he's written into characters that are just kind of the goofball, comic relief of the picture. And I'm not gonna say that's not what he is here, but he's definitely given a role here where he can kind of expand that and really has an arc that satisfies. I really enjoy Sophia Lillis as well. She plays a druid named Duork, and there's a moment in the middle of the movie where her character has to escape a castle, and it's all done in one shot, and it is, I think, the best shot in the movie, and just kind of out of left field. I was having a good time with this movie anyway, and then that scene happened, and I was like, okay, the directors and the studio really did their best to just put as much money into this movie as possible and really flesh out some of these characters' powers. It was really fun. I mentioned the world building, and I have to say it is really good here. Again, I've never really played Dungeons & Dragons, but I know a little bit about the lore. I actually have watched some Dungeons & Dragons live streams and YouTube channels because it's just sometimes the actors are really good and it's just really fun and interesting to watch them. So I think that the filmmakers did a lot to really kind of comb through the Dungeons & Dragons lore and give references to it, but also build the world in the way that you understand that wizards are just everywhere, paladins are everywhere, magic is just in the world, and people live in it. And they do their best to allow that kind of stuff to really facilitate the humor here. This movie is really funny. I can see why it's getting such really good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. This is definitely a crowd pleaser. Now, I will say that there are definitely times where some of the humor did feel a little bit forced, but those moments are very few and far between for sure. The story is coherent, the characters are really well done, and it is a satisfying ending, and I really did like that they brought in a very poignant and a little bit more down-to-earth major plot that incorporates the really good acting of Chris Pine and really helps to just ground this movie about fantasy. Now, for some criticisms, I will say that sometimes the humor doesn't always hit. The plot is a little overstuffed, right? There's a lot of characters, and sometimes it's a little difficult to kind of understand exactly what's going on because there's just so much being thrown at you and there's so much lore. So I can see why some people might be turned off by that. But ultimately, the major plot of this movie is just so well stated, and the pacing is so well done that I know that most people are going to be able to follow this movie pretty easily. I give Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves a 9 out of 10. A really fun fantasy movie with a really great ensemble cast, with a plot that is, while being fantasy, is really down to earth and allows the ensemble cast to really have their own moments, and really incredible world building that really lets you believe that people are just living with magic and dragons and other fantasy creatures. The humor hits more than it misses. I will say there's definitely some times where the humor didn't hit completely for me, but those moments are very few and far between. I have to say that this is also, I believe, Michelle Rodriguez's standout role. This is some of the best acting I've ever seen her do. Really, she does an incredible job here. A seriously surprisingly fun fantasy movie that I think everyone should go watch in the movie theater. A surprisingly fun fantasy movie that I think is just fun for everyone. Go watch this before you go watch Shazam, and go watch this before you watch Ant-Man. This movie is great. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate that. If you've watched all the way to the end, please like, comment, subscribe. If you comment, I'll make sure to reply to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.